Hey, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Bree, and on this channel, I like to share my experience with budgeting, as well as covering other personal finance topics. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing how I put together my 2026 annual budget. So every year, I like to sit down and brainstorm what are my goals and what kind of expenses can I expect to come in this year. And then what I like to do is put together what I call is an annual budget, which is really just a monthly budget that takes into account annual expenses. Typically, I will put this budget together at the beginning of the year, and it will be the budget that I follow for the next 12 months. Now, of course, changes can happen throughout the year if they need to, but for the most part, this is going to be the framework that I follow for the year. And then once I'm done putting these numbers together, I will typically load all of this into the app called YNAB, or You Need a Budget, and that's where all the incoming and outgoing transactions actually happen, and I keep track of what's happening in those categories. And especially for where I have like maybe some sinking funds that I'm putting together to save money in, I can watch those categories build, and then as the expenses come in, they can go against those categories. Now, the reason that I do an annual budget, or I budget in this way, is because I like to keep things really consistent month to month. I find that in order to help with overspending, I have to work on a lot of behaviors behind the scene. And when my numbers are all over the place month to month, it can be really hard where in one month maybe you spend a little bit more versus another month. So I find that keeping things consistent can help me work on the behaviors and sort of put in some guardrails as to what I can and cannot do, and what ultimately supports me in meeting these goals. So when I do put a budget together, I really do like to follow a specific framework. I've been following this for the last couple of years. It's very popular. It's just the 50-30-20 framework, where 50% goes towards needs, 30% goes towards wants, and 20% goes towards needs and investing. Over the last couple of years, I have always made sure to break things down this way so that I can be a little bit more aware of where exactly my money is going. I've always strived to keep my needs around 50% because I do find that that gives me a lot of margin for other things, and it helps to prevent me from overextending myself when it comes to spending and in my budget. And then in today's video, it's actually gonna show, instead of a 20% for long-term savings and investing, it's gonna show a 10% number. So I did decide to move my longer-term savings, which is my emergency fund savings, and put that under wants, because I wanted a clearer picture as to how much I was actually investing. So that is one minor change that I'm making to my 2026 budget, just so that I can visually see what that actual percentage is, and it's not inflated by the money that I am saving and putting into my emergency fund. During this exercise, I will also sort of do some goal setting. And of course, my goals right now are first to live off of 80%. So making sure to try to always put 20% aside, either for the long-term savings or investing. So that's typically where I start. Is I will look at a high level what I expect to come in the month and take 20% out of that and see if I can work with that number. And then of course, I am trying to fund my emergency fund. It's not quite where I would like it to be. So this year I am planning to put some money into that, and I will show in just a moment how I expect to reach that goal. Lastly, I feel like I don't really have any big debt payoff goals right now. I am currently paying the minimums, and that is because the debt that I do have, that was the decision I made with it. I will be sharing a separate video that goes over what I expect is going to be my debt payoff date, and then just some future planning of what I expect to do with that money once it comes available. And then, in case I didn't mention it earlier, but I do run every single decision I make through my budget. So if I'm ever going to take on maybe like a new fixed expense, whether that's like a gym membership, or especially if I'm moving to a new apartment, every decision I make about money and it concerns my finances has to go through my budget, and I have to actually like make a budget around it before I decide to do that thing. I feel like that's the one thing over the past few years that has really kept me going and being able to meet my longer term goals, because there have been plenty of opportunities to increase my fixed costs, and by constantly making sure that I keep them at a specific percentage, it just makes sure that I'm not living beyond my means. So first, let's go ahead and pop over to the income section of my spreadsheet. Now, the first line says gross income. I don't think that's the right term for this. This is more like my net income, so what's actually hitting my bank account on a monthly basis. I do get paid bi-weekly, so I get about 2 paychecks a month. And then in this income adjustment line right below, this is where I account for additional paychecks. So because I get paid bi-weekly, I do get 2 additional paychecks a year, and they come about 6 months apart. So when I'm doing my annual planning, I do like to account for those, because month to month, I don't have a ton of money to save into my emergency fund. And so instead, what I do is I put those extra paychecks straight into my emergency fund. And so I like to incorporate them in this annual budget process so that I can see the percentages and how much is going into that. I also, in this income adjustment, have what is going into my 401k. So of course, the money that is hitting my account does not include the 401k contribution. So I do include that here as well, so that I can get a clear picture as to how much I am investing overall. So on average, my total income is $6,365 a month. Of course, this is not what I see month to month hitting my account, but this does take into account that income adjustment section. So what I have to the right of here is what I call my budget builder. This is a new worksheet that I put together that I'm kind of working with. And if this is something that you might be interested, let me know down in the comments, and I might be able to make it a little bit more shareable. So on the left-hand side are the goal percentages, and those are still set at 50, 30, 20, just because that's what I've traditionally been working with. And then to the right side, you can see my actual percentages. So when it comes to my needs are actually coming in at 59%. This is the highest it has ever been. And I would say I'm definitely feeling it these days. And so I definitely don't want to go any higher than this. And the big contributing items to that is, first is my car payment. I did purchase a car a couple years ago, and I financed a portion of it. And so I am still paying on that loan. I've got about 3 more years left, and I'm not looking to make any extra payments. When I purchased that car, I ran through all the finances and how much I wanted to put down and what my monthly payment was going to be and how much interest was going to be on that loan. I made the decision a few years ago of what I wanted to do, and when I put that together, there was no paying that debt off earlier or sooner. So it does contribute to my higher needs percentage. It is something I'm looking forward to. Once I pay off, my needs will come down by that amount. The second contributing item to my higher needs percentage is my rent. So up until middle of last year, I always looked for the best deal when it came to rent, and I always tried to keep my living expense really low, and it worked for me for a really long time. But about mid last year, I had to make an unexpected move, and with that move, I opted to finally get a 2-bedroom apartment for my daughter and I, because it just finally made sense. And because of that decision, I wasn't able to find a very competitive rate at the time, so I would say I'm kind of living at the market rate of what a 2-bedroom apartment goes for, and it's pretty high. But if I go down into my needs section, you can see I've got my rent that's currently at $1,765. Now that does include the base rent and the additional fees that are included in that. And then you can see my car loan at $360. Now I do have some extra expenses here. Not a whole lot of changes from 2025, maybe a couple of increases. For example, electricity, I did go ahead and increase that average to $160. And like I said, because this is an annual budget, I am putting aside money for annual expenses. So towards the bottom of this list are going to be my annual expenses. They come up once a year, but I put aside a little bit of money month to month in order to cover them. And that's going to include things like my YNAB annual subscription, my life insurance, and my renter's insurance. Now my wants is coming in at 30%, and this includes both this wants column as well as all of my sinking funds. My wants column is more of the month-to-month expenses, and then my sinking funds are more of those annual expenses that I'm putting money aside for. And ultimately they are wants because they're not really for investing. So that's why they get grouped in with that category. And so in my wants, month to month, I have a couple things like gymnastics for my daughter. She has a small allowance. We have some spending money for food and drinks. I have a new category, which is called my guilt-free category. So this is supposed to be a category that's going to be a little bit more intentional spending for myself. And then I've got this miscellaneous category. Now that my daughter's in more activities, I often have found that month to month, there are just miscellaneous costs that come up that are associated with those kinds of activities. So I have decided to put $150 aside to cover those random expenses that come up month to month. When it comes to my sinking funds, not too many changes again from 2025. I really have dialed in my budget, I feel like, after all these years. So I do have a video from last year that goes over the 20 sinking funds that I have. So maybe I will post it down in the description. I might make an updated video if it makes sense, maybe to talk about the experience of how last year went, but it was really successful. And so like I said, not too many changes. I did decrease some categories. I think this year when I was thinking about where I wanted my money to go when it comes to wants, I really just realized that traveling is really important to me, and not so much like from a vacation perspective, but all of my friends and family have moved to various states. And so it's really important to me to be able to spend time with them, even if it is just one trip a year. And so in order to kind of beef up that vacation fund money, I did go ahead and decrease some other categories so that I could get a little bit more in there and have a little bit more spending for the year. And then of course, down at the bottom is my emergency fund that I was talking about. And the only reason I moved it into the wants is because I wanted a clearer picture of my investing number. But again, that 455 number is just those 2 additional paychecks that come in through the year. So I've got them and counted in here so that I can get my percentages right, but I actually don't get that money into my emergency fund until typically May and November. And then lastly is my investing. I am currently at 10%. Of course, my long-term goal is to continue to increase that number, but at this time I do contribute to a 401k at work. So you can see partially that amount there, and then I'm planning to increase my 401k contribution by $150. And then I also contribute to my Roth IRA with $70. And then of course, that is my portion. I do a separate calculation that takes into account my employer's match so that I can get a better idea of the total percentage that's going in on an annual basis. And that is pretty much my 2026 budget. And this is the framework that I will follow for the rest of the year. So typically once I put this together and once it's down on paper and I sort of approve it within myself, I will then load these numbers into my YNAB app, and that is what I will follow month in and month out, and then just track my spending from here. And then what's nice with YNAB is at the end of the year, I can look at the annual totals and I can decide if I need to make any changes. I also have a category that is not here, but it is called stuff that I forgot to budget for in YNAB. And any kind of like usually bigger expenses that didn't fit one of these categories will go into there. And then I will typically decide whether or not I need to create a new category in my budget for it. But I hope you were able to find some value from this video and how exactly I put my budget together every year. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments, and make sure to stay tuned for my debt payoff video, as well as I have a 5-year plan coming up that I'd like to share. So see you in the next one. Bye.